Hey, Winnie Anderson here. Welcome to today's episode of The Courageous Entrepreneur. We move through our days with an ongoing monologue that plays throughout the day in our head. And what we tell ourselves impacts how we feel, what we do, what we achieve, and it impacts even who we are. We know this cognitively, right? But changing the things we tell ourselves will really make an incredible change to our future and will impact our future. I discovered this initially in my 20s when I started to really tune into what was going on inside of me and recognizing the connection between what I was thinking and what I feel. And I started making changes to my personality, and which then impacted my future, of course, at that time. I periodically would recognize the need to make some more adjustments in my thinking and my beliefs overall in that inner monologue as I would come face to face with specific challenges. And it really made a difference in how I overcame my car accident back in 1999 and in facing the abuse I experienced as a child, as well as the abuse I experienced as a corporate employee in some of the unhealthy places that I worked. But I can tell you that my progress would not have been as significant as it has been over the last few years had it not been for the person who's our guest today. And I consider myself fortunate to know him and fortunate to have had the opportunity to get a little piece of the work that he does with people. So I think his work is really powerful, and I know it's going to make a difference to you, and I wanted to make sure that I shared him with you. So let me introduce you to my good friend and colleague, Jeff Rock. Jeff is a career coach, a brand storyteller, and a certified personal branding strategist. His work helps professionals to uncover, embrace, and make sense of their past, to leverage it so it supports their transition to a new career or to new business success. His corporate experience, combined with his unique ability to see your potential, mine your past skills and accomplishments, and break free from the negative aspects of your story, enables him to coach and support professionals in their career transitions to create life and work that brings them joy and is true to their essence. And isn't that really what we all want? So welcome, Jeff. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Winnie. I always enjoy our conversations, so thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, you're so welcome. Let's just dive right in here. So first of all, can you give folks the big picture of what you refer to as story and explain how that impacts our ability to then achieve our goals?
Sure. So when you think story, there's the story that we all know, the folk tales that have a narrative arc to them, a hero. But a broader definition is stories can be anything that we tell ourselves, that any beliefs that we have that come from a sort of mini narrative that we develop for ourselves. The interesting thing about story is we are wired to learn and experience the world through stories. And that's been proven through fMRI and recent neuroscience studies. And so as we learn through stories, we act upon them. So story drives behavior. So when you think about things in terms of setting goals, objectives and things that you want to achieve in your life, you have to align your stories with those goals and objectives. Otherwise, the stories can be impediments. So stories can fuel progress and success, but they can just as easily and often do inhibit success and kind of put a damper on what we can achieve.
Okay. So I want to touch on those issues. You mentioned a couple of really great points there. So how does it impair our ability to achieve?
Well, let's just focus on the aspect of beliefs. So if there's something about ourselves or our world as we see it through our own glasses, the optics, if you will, if we have limiting beliefs that are embedded in those stories, then those are the things that we're going to act upon. Conversely, if we have confidence in ourselves because our stories support that, that shifts the ability, that shifts the energy, and it opens up the opportunities to be successful.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So,
that makes sense.
No, that's okay. Only because the Super Bowl was yesterday, and I was reading some of the stories about it following up. And as most people probably know, the Patriots were way behind in the third quarter, but the quarterback, Tom Brady, believed that they could win, even into the fourth quarter. And he told that story to everybody, and it wasn't a new story to them. And his belief that they could win drove what was some considered to be nearly impossible, greatest comeback in all of the NFL Super Bowl history. So a lot of teams, you get behind, and that's where you often have a blowout, is we're losing. Then the narrative, internal narrative starts to become, we can't win this. And then the energy drains out, and it's just very difficult to come out of that. But the quarterback shifted the narrative in this case, and look at what happened. It just gave everybody peak performance.
That is a really great example, and there are tons of them in sports history. You can, if you're any kind of sports fan, or you're at least aware of the pop culture of athletics and sports, and even on a local standpoint, we've all got our college teams and our local sports teams that are great stories on many levels, and that is a great story. And I think part of what it illustrates is that we're behind in the score. We are losing as a team. We are not losers, right? So the fact that we're behind in the score, which means that we're losing, is a fact. But we are not losers means that we can change that story. Would you say that's a fair assumption?
I would say that that's a fair assumption. To that, I would add, and I'll talk about framing further on, but the real challenge, the real enemy, as they put it, was the clock. We can win. It's just a matter of how do we do it in the time we have left. Right. That's a different question from how are we going to come from way behind? How are we going to be, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time on the Atlanta Falcons? All those are really different questions. But when you say we've got this, but we have to do it quickly, that's a very different frame, and look at the energy and focus that it produced.
Right. Yeah. That, again, another great example, and I think it takes the question to a practical level rather than a focus on obsessing about, can I do this? And it reminds me of Apollo 13. And that
yes.
great scene where they had to make some kind of filter, and they had all these parts, and of course the great line that failure is not an option. And I think that level of focus takes a lot of the emotion out of the situation that we can find ourselves in, and then move forward factually to, okay, this is a problem and I'm going to fix it.
Absolutely. The fear and doubt doesn't enable you to marshal your resources. Right. Whereas the confidence story, that quick vision story of this is what we have to do, we have to make this work. And so that was where all the focus was. And yeah, that was a great movie. That was one of the best movies ever made for that scene alone.
Yeah. So let's talk then about where story comes from, because of course, Tom Brady's a champion for a reason. And so you have somebody who might be watching this saying, well, that's them. They're these superhuman astronauts are astronauts for a reason. NFL quarterbacks are quarterbacks for a reason. Not everybody can do that. So where does the story come from? And then how do we develop the ability to tell this more powerful story to focus on a problem?
The stories are cumulative. We've been hearing them since we could manage language. And because I think no one really fully understood the impact of stories and what people say to other people, and I'm thinking parents and teachers and coaches and employers, but we pick up all these things along the way, and it becomes part of our larger narrative. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, most of us were not brought up with the level of support that would be ideal. Come on, you can do this, and helping people achieve goals and creating that solid foundation of an origin story that supports wherever that person wants to take themselves. The real challenge with all of this, though, is it's accumulated at a subconscious level and then acted upon at a subconscious level, so that those stories kind of kick off. The little tape in the head starts playing and gives a really negative message, and that's taken as truth. And it's not until you really challenge that story or understand, become aware of the fact that it is a story that you're carrying, right. Until such time as you recognize that, then you're somewhat a slave to it. Right. We can't handle that which we can't put a name to. We can't change it. But if we understand that it's a story, now we understand that it's something we can change. If you can name the story, you can change the story, and then decide, is this a story I want to keep? Is this a story I want to get rid of? Or is this something that's just closed that needs to have the next chapter rewritten?
Right. Okay. So, and we're not blaming anybody. We're not, some people have experienced abuse. Some people have just experienced a relatively normal, in air quotes, childhood.
Yep.
But so we're just tossing things out here. But as children, where we're most vulnerable and I guess probably easily influenced by what we hear and what we're told, right? By the adults who are in our world, who are in control of our lives to a large degree, right? So we have parents, we have older siblings, we've got other adults that are in our sphere of living. We go into school and we start hearing things as well, right? So we hear that we can't, as a child, right? That was something that I heard all the time, that you can't do that. You're not smart. You're stupid. And you're ad nauseum negativity. Then, I went to school and I had proof that I wasn't stupid, right? But I would see things or I would be told things like, I had a teacher once, or my guidance counselor, I wanted to take an art class, and he said, "Oh, you don't want to do that." I'm like, "Yeah, I do." No, you don't, because you're not creative. So you need to stay focused on this, right? Oh, really? Wow. Okay, I thought I was. Well, I'd like to try. No, you don't want to do that. So then, you go into, now you're into working, and you start hearing what you can and can't do by others, right? So is that how this kind of stuff gets layered and we start owning it?
Yes. So recently I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think the perfect metaphor that I've come to is from the Harry Potter movies, the Sorting Hat. And if you haven't seen the movie Harry Potter goes into Hogwarts, and everybody has to be sorted into one of the different schools. And so they put on the sorting hat that decides which way they're going to go. And that happens to us all the time. As a species, we want to sort everything in, out, you there, you over here, and group them and separate them. which I suppose could be really helpful, except for the fact that so very frequently the sorting hat turns out to be very, very misguided and just inaccurate. And so we take that sorting, because it's usually from someone in an authority figure, and we react to it, accept it as our truth, and then those behaviors that we do because of we're reacting to the sorting hat, it just kind of builds upon itself, and we keep going down kind of the wrong path instead of taking a step back and challenging the truth of it.
Right. And that happens as employees as well, as we hear all of these labels that people put on us, and as we're faced with this bizarre interpersonal experience that is work. And often, and we could go on for days about this topic alone, but we won't, that we can have abusive bosses who are adding to our story in a negative way and creating some issues around that. Can you share just quickly what kind of impact an abusive work environment can have on the story that you tell yourself?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, it's endemic in companies that use a forced ranking process, because the numbers have to align, and that you're ranked against everybody else, and you have to fall into a particular category. The narrative that goes with it has to support the rating, and so you're really forcing managers to give negative feedback when it's not necessarily deserved. And that starts to get to our identity, and that identity is a big subject, but how we identify ourselves and how we see ourselves makes a difference in how we relate to other people. And so if you're under any kind of a situation where you're feeling oppressed or bullied or really undervalued, it affects your sense of identity around yourself as a provider. And so it affects your interaction with your family. And if you were to go and look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what happens really is that effect pushes you down into the lower levels where you're thinking about basic safety issues instead of moving towards growing and moving into a place of self-actualization. You kind of cramp down to the bottom again. And so it affects really everything you do. Then it affects your sleep, and then it affects your immune system, and it's really a downward spiral.
So how about sharing then some tips or strategies to begin to even recognize that we've got this story and it needs to change?
So I think the best way to see them and recognize them is to train someone to be a story listener for you. And the reason I say that is because we're living inside of our heads. We're operating on these stories, and we're not aware of them. You know, I still have some that even with all the work I do around this, I've come across stories that I've been carrying for decades. So we're able to articulate things about our past and our stories, but we don't recognize it when it's coming out of our own mouth. Someone has to be listening to it and reflect it back.
Right.
And I've done this with lots and lots of classes where I've been teaching master's groups in counseling, and I just put people together. I have them tell a story about a success or something. And the thing is that most people will start putting in qualifiers. Well, I just did this. I don't like the word just.
Yep.
Or I did this as part of, this larger group, and they'll downplay their contributions instead of recognizing the value of them. Right. And so someone else really has to listen to you talk about your stories. And it can be a good friend. It can be someone that you decide you're going to make the story pact with, if you will, kind of like accountability partners, just someone to share stories. It's pretty, once you get the hang of it, and it doesn't take long. Like I said, this is usually a 10-minute exercise in one of the classes I do. Just like, here's some basic rules. The listener listens and watch for words that are qualifying or where the person is actually diminishing their roles or capabilities, and reflect that back to them. Over and over and over, what happens, what comes out of this is two things. One, someone recognizes a story and owns it and all of the positivity that goes with it. The other thing that almost invariably happens with everyone is that in the telling of the story, they find a connection that they didn't know was there. And so it's really a win-win. You're able to identify some of the things that are holding you back, and you also make a connection with another human being.
Yeah, it's a powerful experience to share that kind of information and then allow someone to point that out to you. And then, wow, I think the conditioning is so deep that we often don't even realize that we said those things out loud.
Yes.
So I do think that that's a great strategy for everybody to adopt. And I think that it's probably likewise easier for us to start tuning into what others are saying and hearing their story, right? You can do it probably with if you have children, if you have friends that you talk to on a regular basis, you can start tuning in. I'm really hypersensitive to when some of my accountability partners will call themselves stupid or will really insult themselves and the effort that they're making when in fact they should be celebrating. So that's something that I'm particularly sensitive to. But I think that's great information. So one of the things that I personally really wrestled with, especially after the work we did together, was the issue of what stories do I need to share as part of my bio or overall marketing, and what stories don't I need to share? And I think that can be especially hard when you've never shared anything and you're trying to put on, they're almost like new clothes, trying to figure out what's going to work and present you in the world in the way you want to be. Can you share any thoughts on that, choosing what stories become an important part of the narrative moving forward?
So I think the first thing to do is get the sorting hat working on the stories themselves. So what are the ones that you want to keep? And so what stories do you want to keep? And you want to keep anything for yourself that's generative. That's more life-giving than life-diminishing. You want to keep things that help you with your identity, to understand really who you are, what drives you, what's at your core to the story of you. And then some of them need to go into the stop telling category, but it might be a stop telling everybody, but maybe keep it to share with certain people. So the important aspects of it that people need to know to understand about who you are, that maybe show some vulnerability, but by the same token or give them something to make a connection with, then that's probably something I would share. If it's something that's really deep and personal and hurtful, I'd set it aside until such time as I was speaking one-on-one with someone and you needed that story to make the connection to get the message to that other person. Guess what? You're not the only one. In fact, there's lots and lots of us.
Okay.
So it's a choice and it's situational.
Okay.
But I think that, if you categorize them that way, and then those become the start telling these stories, the ones that do show your vulnerability, but also show your vision. your lessons learned, give kind of a map of your journey so far, as it were, and shows the identity, because I hate the word inspirational just because it's been used so much, but inspirational. We need inspirational stories. Yours is very inspirational. I've been inspired by it, and it's something that I think would be great for you to put out there, just so you can gather the people to you who need to hear it without getting too personal. But some of the really deeply personal ones, and I've shared, there's some stories I've only told to one person. But it was told with the intent and purpose.
Okay. So
Does that help?
It does. And I love the image of the sorting, that there are going to be stories that become part of your overall message of why you, right? I always talk about the 3 questions that you need to answer: why you, why this, why now, why you're the person, why your solution is right, and why now is the time to act. So there are core stories that make you, right? I am an adult survivor of child abuse. I'm also a survivor of workplace abuse, and then I have the physical injury as well that adds to the trauma that I lived. So that in general is a platform of why me, right? And then so I think that everybody needs to think about that. What stories make them and make them the person who does the work they do. Then there are these illustrative stories, right? And they're going to help emphasize a point that you're trying to make, perhaps, and then build a connection and resonate with the audience, whoever that person might be, right?
Yeah, so you've got some stories of challenge and difficulty, and there's an intersection of all of those. And people who see something like this, well, I had this traumatic event, and I had this rough start of a childhood, and then later I had my adult version of my earlier childhood stuff. And, most people have this the multiple touch points of things that have gone wrong.
Right.
But then again, it comes down to, now's a good time to reframe it and look back and make sense of it all.
Yeah, that's great too. And Tony Robbins has, there's some video of Tony Robbins going around where he's talking to somebody who has experienced abuse. And of course, he's a child of abuse himself. And he talks about that if you're going to take the negative from that, you have to accept that there was a positive that came out of that. And I think that really illustrates also the power of story and how we're in control of what we're going to do with that story, how we're going to frame it, and how we're going to use it to either limit us or as a springboard to move forward.
Framing is critical. Framing is almost everything. Shankar Vedantam, in his podcast Hidden Brain, did a piece on this recently, and it was really good. So I would recommend. I can't think of the name of that one, but it was relatively recent, about someone who had this horrible accident and what happened after that. It's chilling, but it does look at the whole idea of framing.
Okay, great. And when I put this episode on the website, I'll include a link to that episode, as well as some of the other things all the other things that we've mentioned in our conversation. Jeff, I want to thank you for being with me today. Your information is always so awesome. I always get so many ahas when we're talking. What's the best way for people to reach out to you, to connect with you, to learn more? Because if you have an opportunity to work with Jeff, you need to take it. He will really help you recognize your story, embrace what needs to be embraced, and dump what isn't working. So what's somebody's next step for you?
So next step would be to go to my website, swiftrivercoaching.com. And there is a place to sign up on the first page on the right. And if you sign up, then I'll have your contact information. You'll have access to a previous video I did with Winnie. And then I would suggest going down on my first page. I offer a free consultation. And so there's a place to book that, and we can talk and see if I can be of assistance to you.
Outstanding. So thank you, and thank you for listening and watching this. I know that the audio, at times we had some problems with it, but I appreciate your patience. And I definitely encourage you to reach out to Jeff. So thanks for listening and watching. This has been Winnie Anderson with another episode of The Courageous Entrepreneur, and we will catch you in another episode soon.
Thanks, Winnie.